Holy City Center Radio is episode 171, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Wednesday, September 13th, 2023. It is hump day here in Charleston and, well, everywhere across the country, but we're here for Charleston, of course. I hope you all have a good week going so far, and just a few more days to go until the weekend. Gotta love it. Wednesday is always a fun episode for me. I'm usually in the swing of things, but also, knowing that you're not too far from a break is nice as well. Not too much going on here in Holy City Centerland. Just been plugging along, doing lots of work, going to meetings and things like that, but nothing exciting to report back to all of you. So let's not delay this any further. Let's get into the news. All right, in the last episode, we talked about a few things, including Moms for Liberty. I'm sure you remembered as I tried to lather everybody up into a panic about this group, but hopefully it wasn't that extreme. Hopefully it was just putting something in your head, just a little bug in your ear. Just let's keep an eye on these things. And we have a little bit more information about one of those scenarios, and that is what happened at the Charleston County School Board meeting on Monday. For those who need a quick refresher, there were some accusations that the Moms for Liberty-backed candidates were maybe attempting to deceive the public. We're trying to hide something, not just from the community, but also from the non-Moms for Liberty-backed candidates on the school board, as they have what they call a special called meeting. So they have their meeting, it's public. People can show up and, well, they did at one point do away with the public comment section, which is a whole nother issue. But usually, and it looks like they did discuss adding that back. You can go and voice your opinions, or just like a city council meeting and things like that. But they can have special called meetings that are done behind closed doors, different boards, different cities, they all have a little bit different rules regarding them. But they do not have to share anything with the public. And a lot of people showed up at the meeting on Monday because there was concern that they were going to try to fire the superintendent. That was the rumor going around. And the fact that those four members were a little cagey with their answers when asked about what they were going to discuss. Instead of giving any specifics, they would say things like, oh, it's pretty self-explanatory. We're talking about the superintendent's contract. Well, there's a million different directions that can go, of course. And so that led people to believe, no, they're trying to hide something. Well, meeting went on, lasted a few hours. These meetings are brutal, and I do not try to watch many of them, and I did not watch this one, to be honest with you, because it's just too much. It's a lot of in the weeds stuff. There's motions. It's boring, to be honest with you. And the real important thing was going to happen behind closed doors anyway. So they did meet behind closed doors. The people who did show up as far as the community to the meeting were there when they got out of the special called meeting, and they did not tell anybody anything about that meeting at all. So you may have seen some clips online. People were voicing their displeasure, saying, you need to tell us something. What was that meeting about? And they refused to. But Live 5 News has a report where we got a little bit of information. So after this kind of contentious meeting, the whole thing, people were just gearing up, waiting for what was going to happen at the end. We finally have the chair of the Charleston County School Board giving some information to Live 5 News. And just so you all know, the board chair, her name is Pam McKinney, and she is one of the Moms for Liberty-backed candidates. So at Monday's board meeting behind closed doors, they did discuss the contract of Superintendent Dr. Eric Gallion, who was hired less than 3 months ago. And they said it was to address a personnel issue. And she wanted to say that the accusations that she and her fellow board members colluded to deceive the public is not accurate. So according to McKinney, the special called meeting on September 11th of this year, of course, was to clarify the duties and responsibilities of the superintendent based on the contract. McKinney went on to say the executive session discussed these and no motion for a vote evolved. That is all that she gave. So a little bit more information. At least we know the topic of firing him, if it was mentioned, did not get to the point where it was called up to a vote. So according to McKinney, it was all just a discussion, some clarification about some things. Now, her being upset that there was rumor, conjecture, people wondering what was going on, she has no one to blame but herself and her fellow board members that fall under that Moms for Liberty backing, because they would not discuss what was happening at this meeting. Now, I'm sure there's reasons for these special called meetings, some things that shouldn't be in the public eye. I get that. I'm sure there's some things. I'm not going to speculate on situations right now, but I'm sure we could all think of something like, you know what, it makes sense that the board would meet, maybe for privacy issues, whatever it could be related, maybe it's something to do with a student or a teacher. And they don't need that out in the public. Is there, maybe they don't have all the facts and they're trying to figure some things out. So I get that. I get that there's going to be those meetings, but you could easily put to bed rumors just by responding and providing a little bit of detail. She didn't have to give, hey, this is exactly what we're going to look into. But her answer to Live 5 after, oh, we just wanted some clarification on the superintendent's duties and responsibilities. There's a couple things we just want clarification on. We're going to discuss them together, and that's it. That would have ended all of this. Just a simple answer like that. Yeah, I'm sure there'll still be some of us in the community like, okay, well, what are you trying to clarify? Are you trying to find a loop? Yeah, there's always going to be people. And look, I don't trust these board members at all, just based on their actions so far since being elected. But that would have made me and, think that the chances of the superintendent being fired were much less likely. And as I said, they only have themselves to blame for anybody who thought they were up to something, because it certainly seemed like it. And let's be honest, maybe they were. And because of the blowback, they tried to reel it back in. Maybe they're laying the groundwork for something they're working on later. Who knows? But this could have easily been squashed if they just gave just a little bit more detail. Didn't have to get into specifics, but just something like she told Live 5 after. That was a very easy solution. It's just further proof that this board, specifically these 4 members, but, they are all together. They're not communicating with each other. There's clearly factions on this board, and I'm sure there always are, but it seems like these are more prominent they've been in years past. And we're seeing this with these Moms for Liberty candidates. They come in with very specific goals, and a lot of the times those goals are somewhat extreme, and they're not really actually ready to govern or lead or anything like that. They're looking for ways to incorporate their agenda, get people out of positions that they don't want in those positions, so they can further, what their goals have been. And they're not interested in working with other people. They're not interested in doing things the quote unquote right or normal way. And that's been evident with this board from the start. Remember that the finalists, the candidates' names leaked online. How does that happen? Even if it wasn't the board, one of the board members directly posting it online, how did it get out there? Someone on the board must have leaked it. Now, we don't know who did or why, so it could be anybody. It might not be one of the Moms for Liberty back candidates. So that's why I say this board in general, there's a lot we don't know, but they are not operating in a way that I would say is super professional, and they're not great about clarifying things or being open and transparent to the public. And this is just another example of that. So the rumors and the concern about the superintendent being fired did not happen. Who knows what exactly the purpose of this meeting was, if it was actually something nefarious or not. We don't know. And one of the reasons we don't know is because they are awful at communicating and letting the public know exactly what's going on, or at least providing enough details so that rumors don't spin out of control. Now, they can't address every single rumor, and I get that. But this wasn't just like a small group of people online, talking about conspiracy theories. And there was press conferences held. Fellow board members were contacting the media and saying they were concerned about what was going on. This was not just some weird fringe thing. This was people directly involved being concerned, and leaders in the community, not just some random people behind keyboards. So again, just further proof that this board, they don't have a good track record so far of working together. And the Moms for Liberty back candidates don't have a good record of, being as transparent as they claim they were going to be, as much as they said parental rights and everyone in the community should know what's going on in schools. And the problem is we don't know. Well, they're not doing anything to help us see behind the curtain anymore. Next up, a report came out about gun violence being an expensive problem. Yes, gun violence, did you know it costs taxpayers thousands of dollars each every single year? So what's this report about? All right, let's say the obvious first. Gun violence is a very political issue at times when it shouldn't be. There are some political considerations, of course. There's a lot of misinformation out there. It's a contentious issue. We know that there's multiple layers to it. It's not just one thing, even though each side seems to pick one thing as the problem. There are multiple layers to it. Okay, we got that all out of the way. But there is one thing that this report says, and that is that gun violence does cost lots of money, even if you were not directly involved in it. Now, I will say the caveat that this report does come from Everytown, their research division. Everytown is a group that sprung out of after the Sandy Hook massacre. That they want sensible, common sense gun reform. So yes, let's get that out of the way. This is obviously a group where this research is a good talking point for them. I have been on Everytown's website. I've looked at some of the research and articles they put out and their social media posts. And yes, I agree with their position on a lot of the things they say. It does. So we do have to acknowledge that, yes, this is an activist group, and you have to sometimes take these things with a grain of salt, even if we agree with them. I trust the research they've done. I've seen reports. I've seen that they're not making their own data. They're pulling from scientific research and things for other reports they've put out. But we do have to acknowledge that. But according to them, gun violence in America causes an estimated $557 billion annually in cost to taxpayers. Well, more specifically, a portion of that cost goes to taxpayers. About $37.9 million is covered by the taxpayers themselves, according to this research. So of the $557 billion that gun violence costs America in some capacity, $371.9 million is passed on to the taxpayers. So things like medical bills, follow-up care, lost wages for being out of work, plus, of course, the cost of law enforcement investigations and the judicial system all add up. The more gun violence there is, the more law enforcement has to be involved in those calls, in those cases. And then if they have to investigate, that's more hours, more manpower. And of course, the judicial system gets tied up in these crimes as well. According to the same research group, each South Carolina taxpayer pays an estimated $2,716 each year in relation to gun violence, or about a total of $13.9 million for the entire state. So each of us, every single one of us listening to this, according to Everytown, 2,716 of your dollars, each of us, is that money that should be ours is covering gun violence. Now, again, some of this is taxes that go to law enforcement and the judicial branch. Those would be things that are paid anyway. But the more gun violence there is, obviously that cost goes up because there's more need for more employees, more hours worked, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously, it's not an exact science. It's an average, and it's based on reports that they've compiled. But it is an interesting talking point. It is something that a lot of people don't examine. It's usually we're talking about the guns themselves, of course, one side. The other side's talking about mental health or video games or books or movies or the downfall of the American family, or there's too many doors, there's not enough doors, or whatever. Not enough guns. We need more guns to combat the gun problem. We don't often hear about the costs associated with it. So that's another reason I found this interesting. The report also found that this is the 10th highest cost per resident in the country. That's talking about South Carolina. So we have the 10th highest cost per resident. So if you were to compare us to other states, how much we're paying in taxes related to gun violence, that's what that means. So we're in the top 10, not a top 10 you want to be in. The national average, the amount that residents pay, is $1,698. South Carolina is over $1,000 more than the national average. So we are paying more than most people in this country for the costs associated with gun violence. So a death related to gun violence costs an estimated average of $247,000 in taxpayer money, and a firearm related injury can cost an estimated $25,000. The latter, according to the Everytown research, is much more prevalent and can really add up. So this report was picked up by several outlets, including Live 5 News. Again, the link is in the show notes, so you can go see the things that they pulled out of it. Plus, they talked to some people in the community, a doctor who deals with gunshot wounds, an advocate by the name of Keith Smalls, who has a really incredible story. Hopefully, I can talk about that in another podcast. And is part of MUSC's Turning the Tide program, which is a violence intervention program. So there's a lot of good information on there. There's also some more data from other entities like the Centers for Disease Control, who now say that firearms are the leading cause of death for children and young adults in this country. That doesn't necessarily mean they were shot by someone else. That also includes death by suicide, just anything involving a firearm. So there's a lot more to go into this. Some of this you've probably heard before, others is new. So be sure to check it out. There's a lot of information. Look into the research yourself, make your own decisions. But I think it was interesting that there was an actual look into the cost. That's something we don't normally talk about. And when you start seeing that, obviously the more important issue is the people we're losing, no doubt about it. But there's lots of layers to it and how this affects life in many other ways. And it's showing how much it's costing us. All people, regardless of political affiliation, are constantly beating up the other side, figuratively, of course, about their spending. Spend too much tax cuts for rich people, whatever it may be. And this is an example of what it's costing our country on an annual basis when it comes to gun violence. And it's just another reason that I think we need severe and radical changes in this country. And that doesn't mean taking everyone's guns away. So let's all settle down with that whole thing. But we need changes. It's getting worse. It continues to get worse. And now we're seeing how much of our life it affects. And it's not just the straightforward things we've always thought about. Last story today, South Carolina has hit its annual record already for the most amount of infants that have been surrendered under what's called Daniel's Law. There was 3 in just 1 week, and that has put us over that record, as I mentioned, and we are here in September. So 3 babies were given up for adoption in South Carolina under the Safe Haven for Abandoned Babies Act. This happened recently within the last few weeks. That brought the total for the year so far to match the most in any previous year. 3 babies were surrendered from August 28th to September 6th, which is an unusually high number in a short period of time. And that brought us to date up to the number of 7. So in the grand scheme of things, 7 doesn't sound like a big number, but it is important to know that we've already hit the record and most likely will surpass it. And these surrenders are happening all across the country, well, the country, sure, but specifically South Carolina, all across the state. McLeod Regional Medical Center in Florence had one. Marion County DSS had to take custody of that baby, for instance. There's also been several others that have been surrendered in Dorchester County, Berkeley County. I mean, you name it, this is happening. So what happens? First of all, Daniel's Law, or also known as the Safe Haven for Abandoned Babies Act, was named for an infant who survived being buried in a landfill in Allendale County. Nurses ended up naming the child Daniel, and that's where it came from. So the law, it's basically a way, so if someone gives birth to a child and they don't want that child, instead of doing something really horrific, ending the child's life, for instance, they can surrender the child as long as they're younger than 60 days old. They can be surrendered in certain places, such as hospitals or fire departments, and no action will be taken against the parents as long, of course, the child is not injured. So if a healthy baby who is less than 60 days old is dropped off at a hospital or a fire department, the parent who drops them off will not be charged in any way. That child will be taken into custody, and usually like a DSS or something like that will work with whatever, whether it's the hospital or fire department or whatever, to make sure this child is taken care of, and then they will eventually be put up for adoption. Since that law was passed, 63 children have been surrendered. Who knows what could have happened to those 63? unfortunately, some of them likely would have died. And so that is great that there is a law that makes sure that, this problem of maybe someone who maybe didn't even know they're pregnant. You've heard these stories usually with, kids in high school or whatever, or you hear these horrific stories about a baby being left somewhere to die. So it's good that there is a way that these folks who may have done something far worse can drop off a child and they'll be taken care of and be okay. Now, we don't know all the details about these, of course. We don't know exactly why each parent is abandoning their child, but it's hard not to assume that part of this, especially since we're talking about this year being on pace to be, it already has tied the record, but will likely break the record. It's probably related to, of course, the talks of the abortion ban, and now the fact that the 6-week abortion ban, which really, as we've talked about, is essentially a complete abortion ban, is in effect. It's hard not to think that some of these are related to that. Or the fact that there are several counties in this state that don't have a single OBGYN specialist. So either way, there's ways we could fix these problems, regardless if it's related to the abortion ban or not. We need better health care in certain counties, specifically for women. We need, there's nothing we can really do about the abortion ban at this point, but obviously going back to Roe v. Wade and the restrictions that it had versus this one would also likely help this scenario where children aren't being abandoned. Now, of course, I know what the other side of the argument's going to be, but we've already covered that base. So again, it's hard not to think that this is part of it. Just something to keep an eye on. It'll be interesting to see how much more that number grows this year and in subsequent years. And if there is some way that data starts to come out about these cases, what was the situation? Did the mother not know they were pregnant? Did they try to get an abortion but couldn't because it was too late, or something? Whatever. It'd be interesting to see what is happening and why these children are being abandoned and why we are breaking records in that. So again, no hard data behind it, just an assumption I have, and I'm sure some of you did as well. And we'll find out more about it. But just like some stories, we don't always have the answers right away. But it's something to look into, something to think about, and maybe we'll have some information on it in the future. That'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. I hope you had a great time listening. I hope it wasn't too terrible. And I will see you again on Friday. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Sound System for producing this episode. And thank you to all of you for listening. And of course, Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every episode. Be sure to support Holy City Center through Patreon or by purchasing merchandise on the website. I will talk to you all again on Friday. But until then, good night and good luck.